Noun. A situation where no progress can be made because disagreement is stuck. Negotiations hit an impasse over scheduling, with neither side willing to trade evening slots, and mediators proposed a rotating calendar. Repertoire. Noun. A set of skills or performances that someone can draw on. Over years on the road, the fiddler built a repertoire of tunes for dancers, for mourners, and for nights when the fire burned low. Obfuscate. Verb. To make something unclear on purpose, often to avoid accountability. Instead of answering, the spokesperson obfuscated with jargon about frameworks, and reporters pressed until he admitted the rollout date had slipped. Sublime. Adjective. So impressive or beautiful that it inspires awe. At the summit, the view was sublime, clouds rolling beneath the ridge like slow surf while distant towns glittered in tiny, patient squares of light. Salvage. Verb. To rescue something from loss or ruin. The storms soaked the picnic, but they salvaged the day by moving indoors and eating cake by candlelight. Intact. Adjective. Whole, not broken. The nest was intact after the wind, with 3 speckled eggs, still warm. Contrite. Adjective. Sincerely sorry after a fault. He sounded contrite when he admitted he had stepped on her new seedlings. Paramount. Adjective. Chief among concerns, overriding. Safety was paramount on the cliff path, so they turned back when the wind began to lift loose stones. Profligate. Adjective. Recklessly wasteful, especially with money or resources. The profligate spending on branded swag annoyed board members who wanted funds directed toward scholarships instead of glossy tote bags. Arbitrary. Adjective. Based on personal choice rather than a clear reason. The team pushed back on the arbitrary deadline, asking for a schedule tied to testing milestones instead of a date that looked good on a slide. Judicious. Adjective. Showing careful and sensible decision-making. His judicious choice was to delay the announcement by a day, ensuring the details were correct instead of rushing and correcting publicly later. Temperate. Adjective. Mild and moderate, especially in climate or behavior. He gave a temperate answer at the dinner table, acknowledging the slight without feeding the flare of tempers across the candles. Quell. Verb. To put an end to something, especially by using force or firm action. Volunteers handed out water and blankets to quell the panic after the lights failed, speaking in calm voices until the backup generator finally coughed to life. Astute. Adjective. Quick to notice what matters. An astute birdwatcher spotted the owl by the shape of a branch that was not a branch. Staunch. Adjective. Firm in loyalty or support. She was a staunch fan of the small library, even when its hours shrank. Tenuous. Adjective. Weak or uncertain and likely to change. Their agreement was tenuous, held together by a deadline and good manners rather than genuine alignment on the main goal. Misanthrope. Noun. A person who dislikes human company and tends to distrust people's motives. Labeled a misanthrope after he moved to the cabin, he still waved at hikers and left firewood by the trailhead when snow was forecast. Recount. Verb. To describe something that happened by telling the story. By the fire. She recounted how the boat had swung broadside to the swell, the lantern sliding once, then holding, until they found the harbor mouth. Mettle. Noun. Courage and determination shown in a difficult situation. The climb tested their mettle when the fog closed in, but they kept moving with measured breaths and a rope rhythm they had practiced on lower cliffs. Exemplary. Adjective. Worth imitating because it sets a high standard. The eldest cousin set an exemplary pace on the ridge, offering a steady hand on the loose scree and pausing where the view opened over the valley. Reconcile. Verb. To bring two things into agreement after they seem to conflict. She tried to reconcile the new policy with the company's stated values, and the tension became the central topic of the staff meeting. Sanguine. Adjective. Hopeful and confident that things will turn out well. She remained sanguine about the harvest despite hail in June, pointing to deep roots and the orchard's history of bouncing back after rough seasons. Ruminate. Verb. To think carefully about something for a long time. He ruminated on the letter during the long train ride, watching Fields stutter past the glass until the sentences rearranged themselves into something he could answer. Skepticism. Noun. A tendency to doubt claims until there is good evidence. Her skepticism served her well on market day, when a vendor promised honey that looked a shade too clear in the sunlight. Verbose. Adjective. Using more words than the idea needs. His verbose letter wandered 3 pages before admitting he would be late. Harmonize. Verb. To make different parts work well together. The producer worked to harmonize the instruments, balancing volume and timing so the song felt unified instead of like separate tracks competing. Affable. Adjective. Friendly and easy to talk to. The innkeeper was affable, pouring cider while he asked which trail we planned to take. Impetuous. Adjective. Acting quickly without enough thought. His impetuous promise to deliver by Friday impressed the client, but the team spent the week repairing the rushed work that followed the bold vow. Corroborate. Verb. To confirm or support a statement or theory with additional evidence. Witnesses who did not know each other corroborated the same detail about the truck's mud flaps, and the investigator finally had a solid lead. Wry. Adjective. Dryly humorous, often with a hint of irony. With a wry smile, he pointed to the spotless kitchen after the party and said the guests had clearly enjoyed the snacks more than the conversation. Redress. Verb. To correct something wrong or unfair, often by making amends. The museum moved to redress decades of exclusion by commissioning new exhibits and hiring curators from the communities whose stories had been sidelined. Unwieldy. Adjective. Difficult to manage because it is large or complicated. The antique wardrobe was unwieldy on the narrow stairs. They tipped it carefully, brass handles catching stray light from the landing window. Contingent. Adjective. Depending on something else happening first. Their hike was contingent on dry weather, so they watched the sky at dawn. Hegemony. Noun. Leadership or control by one group over others. Younger sailors broke the old club hegemony over the regatta when they brought lighter boats and sharper turns. Codify. Verb. To turn habits into clear written rules. The cousins codified their cabin chores on a chalkboard so no one argued about firewood again. Modicum. Noun. A small amount of something, often just enough to matter. A modicum of salt transformed the tomatoes, sharpening their sweetness until the simple salad tasted like something served on a white tablecloth. Adversity. Noun. Hardship that tests endurance. Snowbound for days, they met adversity with rationed wood, shared songs and maps drawn on the cabin wall. Tactful. Adjective. Careful not to offend while still being honest. He offered tactful feedback, focusing on the work's impact and proposing alternatives instead of criticizing the person. Coalesce. Verb. To come together into one whole. Fog and streetlights coalesce into a soft glow over the harbor. Reiterate. Verb. To say something again for emphasis or clarity. He reiterated the goal at the end of the meeting because the discussion had drifted and several people had taken away different priorities. Inundate. Verb. To overwhelm someone with a great amount of something. After the story aired, the shop was inundated with orders, and the owner hired 2 neighbors to help pack jars until midnight, 3 nights in a row. Loquacious. Adjective. Talking a great deal. The loquacious tour guide filled every hallway with stories, but the best moments came when she finally paused and let the old marble atrium speak for itself. Scrutinize. Verb. To examine something carefully in order to judge it. Before signing the lease, they scrutinized the fine print, noting the maintenance clause and the oddly strict rules about visitors. Enact. Verb. To make a rule or plan officially active. The new park board voted to enact evening quiet hours, so campers packed up guitars early and listened instead to owls and wind in the pines. Coerce. Verb. To pressure someone into doing something against their will. The manager refused to coerce anyone into overtime, choosing instead to reduce scope and protect the team's long-term health. Sporadic. Adjective. Happening at irregular intervals rather than consistently. Their communication was sporadic, so tasks slipped quietly until they agreed on a weekly check-in and a shared decision log. Juxtapose. Verb. To place things side by side to highlight differences. The painter juxtaposed cool shadow against a slab of sunlight on the kitchen wall, so the chipped enamel mug looked almost luminous. Restive. Adjective. Restless and impatient, especially under restraint or delay. Passengers grew restive when the plane sat on the tarmac, babies wailing and phones pinging until the captain explained the thunderheads over the field. Elusive. Adjective. Difficult to find, define, or achieve. True work-life balance felt elusive during the busiest season, so she set clearer boundaries and protected a few non-negotiable evenings. Scrupulous. Adjective. Very careful to do what is right and accurate. The old mapmaker was scrupulous about every contour line, erasing and redrawing until the pencil ridges matched the slopes he had walked. Placate. Verb. To calm someone by giving them what they want or by reassuring them. She tried to placate the restless dog with a handful of kibble and a steady voice while thunder rolled beyond the ridge. Inchoate. Adjective. Only partly formed, just beginning. The inchoate garden was still mostly mud with a thin green line along the fence. Synthesize. Verb. To combine separate ideas into a coherent whole. After interviewing stakeholders, he synthesized their feedback into a single plan that balanced speed, cost, and long-term maintenance. Parsimony. Noun. Extreme unwillingness to spend money or use resources. His parsimony showed up in frayed chair arms and a heating schedule that left the reading room cold until donors finally insisted on repairs. Revoke. Verb. To officially cancel a right, decision, or permission. The platform chose to revoke the vendor's access after repeated violations, documenting each incident to avoid a drawn-out dispute. Poignant. Adjective. Deeply moving in a way that makes you feel sad and grateful at once. The farewell was poignant, not because anyone cried loudly, but because small gestures lingered, a hand on a shoulder and a careful smile held too long. Pristine. Adjective. Extremely clean and in its original condition. Snow had fallen overnight, and the meadow looked pristine, a single set of deer tracks stitching a careful path toward the tree line. Proximity. Noun. Nearness in space or relation. The proximity of the beehive made the porch hum on warm afternoons. Nadir. Noun. The lowest point. That gray February felt like the nadir of the year, with ice inside the window frames at dawn. Collaborate. Verb. To work together with others toward a shared goal. Several departments had to collaborate closely, aligning timelines and agreeing on what success would look like before they touched the implementation. Corollary. Noun. A result that follows naturally from something else. A corollary of open windows was moths batting the reading lamp at night. Hinder. Verb. To slow or block forward motion. Deep mud hindered the truck, so they chained up the tires. Derivative. Adjective. Imitative, adding little that is new. The painting felt derivative of a famous sunset, though the brushwork showed real patience. Vacillate. Verb. To keep changing your mind or position instead of deciding firmly. She vacillated between two paint colors for weeks, taping swatches to the door at different hours until the light settled the argument on its own. Quandary. Noun. A tight spot where every choice costs something. He was in a quandary: cut through the marsh and risk mud, or take the long road and miss the last ferry. Inconspicuous. Adjective. Not easily noticed because it blends in. He chose an inconspicuous bench half hidden by lilacs, where he could sketch passers-by without their turning to check his paper. Arcane. Adjective. Known to few, hard to understand without special knowledge. Arcane marks on the stone drew a crowd, though most visitors only guessed at their meaning. Chagrin. Noun. Annoyance or shame after a small slip. To her chagrin, she locked the keys in the car and waited on the grass in the rain. Impecunious. Adjective. Having very little money. Impecunious in college, she stacked crates for shelves and slept on a borrowed futon. Foment. Verb. To stir up trouble or strong feeling. Gossip fomented a feud between neighbors who had shared a fence for 20 years. Reinstate. Verb. To put something back after it was removed. After the repairs, the park reinstated the swing beside the lake. Rescind. Verb. To officially cancel a decision or agreement. When the invitation rested on a mistaken date, the hosts rescinded it gently and sent a new card with the correct evening inked in green. Transient. Adjective. Lasting only a short time before changing. The cherry blossoms were transient. A brief pale cloud along the canal before rain thinned the petals into a pink drift on the water. Florid. Adjective. Overly fancy in style, or very flushed in the face. The parlor felt florid with gold roses on the paper and velvet that swallowed the little light. Repercussion. Noun. An unintended result that follows an action. They considered the immediate savings, but the potential repercussion of losing experienced staff made the decision far more complex. Hasty. Adjective. Too fast, not thought through. A hasty turn on black ice sent the car into the snowbank. Culminate. Verb. To reach a final or decisive point, often after a long process. Years of small grants and volunteer weekends culminated in a community garden with raised beds, a tool shed, and a chalkboard for sharing surplus produce. Exacerbate. Verb. To make a bad situation worse. Ignoring the early complaints only exacerbated the conflict because people assumed their concerns would never be taken seriously. Instigate. Verb. To cause something, often trouble or conflict, to begin. One careless comment was enough to instigate an argument, and it took a patient facilitator to bring the group back to the main agenda. Precarious. Adjective. Balanced on a knife edge, likely to collapse. The ladder felt precarious on the loose gravel, so he wedged a flat stone beneath the feet. Ascertain. Verb. To learn something for certain. She called the harbor to ascertain whether the last ferry had left. Rebut. Verb. To argue against a claim by showing it is wrong or weak. She rebutted the accusation with a timeline of messages and receipts, speaking calmly enough that the room focused on facts instead of volume. Consensus. Noun. General agreement reached by a group. They reached consensus after everyone named their concerns, and the final decision reflected trade-offs that most people could live with. Deference. Noun. Polite respect for someone else's judgment. Out of deference to her grandmother, she tasted the soup first. Mediate. Verb. To help opposing sides settle a dispute fairly. Grandmother stepped in to mediate the argument over who would carry the lantern on the night walk. Devise. Verb. To think up a plan or method. They devised a simple rope pulley to lift the canoe onto the rack. Reciprocate. Verb. To return a gesture or feeling in kind. He shared his water. She reciprocated with dried fruit, and they walked easier after that. Germane. Adjective. Directly relevant to what is being discussed. Her question was germane. It pointed to the loose stare everyone else had ignored. Aberrant. Adjective. Straying from what is normal or acceptable. The bright phone booth in the pine woods looked aberrant, metal and glass beside rough bark. Exculpate. Verb. To show that someone is not to blame. Security footage exculpated the clerk. The register error had happened overnight. Resolute. Adjective. Firm and determined. She stayed resolute during the long hearing, refusing to be rushed, and her steady voice made the room feel less like a spectacle and more like a search for truth. Elevate. Verb. To raise something to a higher level of importance or quality. The new editor elevated the newsletter by tightening the structure and insisting on stories that taught readers something practical. Capable. Adjective. Able to do something well. The dog was capable of opening the latch if a treat sat on the counter. Spartan. Adjective. Simple and lacking comfort or luxury. Their Spartan cabin had no curtains and one narrow bed, but the simplicity made the fire's warmth and the kettle's whistle feel like true riches. Bolster. Verb. To support or strengthen something. He tried to bolster her confidence before the presentation by rehearsing questions with her and reminding her of past successes. Harangue. Noun. A long, forceful speech that scolds or lectures people. The coach's halftime harangue echoed in the locker room, listing missed tackles in brutal detail until even the bench players stared at their laces. Debunk. Verb. To expose a claim as false using facts. A county site debunked the story that the pass was closed and traffic eased by noon. Improvise. Verb. To create or adjust something quickly using what is available. When the projector failed, the instructor had to improvise, turning the lesson into a discussion that still met the learning objectives. Acumen. Noun. The ability to make good judgments in a specific area. Her business acumen helped her spot hidden costs in the partnership offer, even though the headline numbers looked attractive. Skeptical. Adjective. Not easily convinced, inclined to doubt. He was skeptical of the too-good offer, so he read independent reviews and called the company before sharing any personal information. Equanimity. Noun. Calm steadiness of mind when things go wrong. She met the long delay with equanimity, reading her book while others paced the gate. Peripheral. Adjective. Related but not central to the main issue. Budget concerns were real, but they were peripheral to the bigger problem, which was that the project lacked a clear purpose. Circumvent. Verb. To find a way around a barrier or rule. They circumvented the flooded bridge by taking the gravel farm road through the fields. Impartial. Adjective. Not favoring one side over another. As an impartial mediator, she summarized each position accurately and made sure the quiet participants had equal time to speak. Prescient. Adjective. Having good judgment about what will happen in the future. Her prescient decision to stock generators looked dramatic in August, but when the ice storm arrived in February, neighbors traded extension cords for soup. Pragmatism. Noun. A focus on what works in practice rather than what sounds ideal. Her pragmatism showed when the storm turned. She lashed the tarp, moved the herbs under the eaves, and skipped the argument about whose turn it was to fetch wood. Conventional. Adjective. Based on what is usual or widely accepted. Their conventional marketing plan worked fine, but it did not differentiate them in a crowded field where everyone sounded similar. Reassure. Verb. To make someone feel less worried by giving confidence. She reassured the child on the first day of school by kneeling to his eye level and pointing out where she would wait at 3 o'clock by the big maple. Onerous. Adjective. Needing great effort, burdensome, the permit process was onerous enough that small builders gave up, leaving the historic district to larger firms that could afford months of paperwork and hearings. Ambition. Noun. A strong wish to reach a hard goal. His ambition was to learn the guitar well enough to play by the campfire. Endeavor. Noun. A serious effort to achieve a goal. Launching the community garden was an endeavor that required permits, fundraising, and volunteers who could keep showing up after the excitement faded. Compelling. Adjective. Convincing in a way that holds attention and motivates action. The case for change was compelling because it paired personal stories with hard numbers, making the cost of inaction feel immediate. Repudiate. Verb. To reject something as untrue, unjust, or no longer binding. The committee moved to repudiate the earlier memo, posting a corrected policy that named who could approve overtime and how requests would be logged. Callous. Adjective. Hardened to others' pain or feelings. A callous joke about the injured bird stilled the room, kindness returned only after an apology. Concise. Adjective. Expressed in few words without losing meaning. He delivered a concise update that covered risks, decisions, and next steps, sparing the group a long detour into background details. Catalyst. Noun. Something that causes change or action. The documentary became a catalyst for community meetings because it gave residents a shared language for concerns they had voiced separately. Demur. Verb. To object politely or hold back. She demurred when asked to sing, though she hums well while she washes dishes. Permeate. Verb. To spread through something and be present everywhere within it. A smell of wet pine permeated the cabin, clinging to coats and blankets, so even the next day in town felt like it carried the forest on its breath. Wistful. Adjective. Gently sad when thinking about something past. Wistful. He pocketed the seashell he had carried home years ago, its inner spiral worn smooth by thumbs.